Hi, it's Sam here, and welcome back to the channel. I haven't done one of these for a while. It's another book review, and I haven't been doing so many of them as you all prefer the gym workouts, something a bit more action-packed, and maybe find some of the info-only videos a little bit dry. But today, I promise it's going to be a lot juicier, because today we are reviewing William Llewellyn's ANABOLICS 2006. So, this channel is going to cover all aspects of bodybuilding in a frank and candid way. I promise you that. This isn't some kind of fake natty channel or some kind of just gloss over it channel. It's the whole thing. So if you're interested in the whole thing, everything relevant to bodybuilding, make sure that you subscribe. And we're going to dig into this book review of Llewellyn's Anabolics now. So interesting story about how I first got hold of this thing. Every interest I've ever had, I wanted to read all around it and fully understand it. So books is what ties all of my interests together, as may not be surprising, my whole library going on here. And when I got into bodybuilding, I thought, yeah, there's probably more to the story than the training and blah, 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 blah. And I looked into it, different books that were available, kind of did a bit of research into where I might find all of the information. And luckily, I came across this in a shop. So there used to be, in my hometown, Peterborough, a supplement shop called Muscle Finesse. And in amongst like all of the supplements and stuff like that, they had a bookcase with books on training and bits like that. And I saw this. So I was like 17 or 18 years old, and I gingerly picked up the book and went to pay for it, and got a little bit of a raised eyebrow from the staff there. Paid for it, got it home very furtively, and I read the whole thing cover to cover. There's some bits that are kind of duplicates of other entries. I'm going to show you everything that's in here in this review. But apart from the things that were the same compounds in different esters where a lot of the sections are duplicated, I read the whole thing cover to cover, and it gave me a really interesting overview of the hormone and enhancement side that goes into actually all sports, but has kind of been pioneered in many senses by bodybuilders. So I would recommend this book as a really good starting point for understanding that whole side of things, because it starts off with some brilliant chapters all about the general endocrinology of muscle growth, and you can understand where the different categories of hormones and enhancements fall within that scheme of endocrinology, and really understand like how it works. But in the intro sections as well, it covers kind of practical aspects like understanding side effects, and he really breaks down the different kind of sources for these sorts of things. So he talks about pharma grade versus veterinary versus the UGL scene versus like designer gear and so-called pro hormones. So you get a really good understanding of like how the landscape lies in terms of all of that. And then it's really helpful that there's two indexes in here. So there's an index where every chemical is listed by its generic name, and another index where everything's listed by its well-known brand names. So you've got stanazolol, for example, or, more commonly known as Winstrol. But it's listed by both, and everything's listed by both like that. So it's really easy to dip into what you wanted to learn about. And then it's not just the AAS side of things. He covers all of the ancillaries, so they're all indexed as well. So he breaks down like anti-estrogens into aromatase inhibitors and selective estrogen receptor modulators. He talks about insulins. He talks about other ancillary medicines to do with anti-acne, anti-prolactin, appetite suppressants, diuretics. Well, then less ancillary, but more kind of performance enhancing for bodybuilding. He talks about diuretics and fat loss agents and things like that. If you stay all the way through this review, I'm going to pick out one or two examples of things that you might not have heard of that you might find interesting here. But I'll just show you, for example, what one of the entries look like. So this is, the subject of many memes, very well known compound, this one here. And all of the entries are in this much detail. So it gives like the history of it, chemical names, the androgenic and anabolic rating, although we know now that's not, so important or relevant in practice, and then talks about, what were known sources at the time. So it's kind of that level of detail for every compound and ester. He breaks down esoteric topics like esters and ester weights and that kind of thing. So you get the pharmacokinetics of the different esters in a lot of these entries as well. So if you were to read all of this, you would get a really good understanding of things on that side of bodybuilding, and some of the more kind of exciting information that's not so theoretical that you might find interesting to look at before doing the deep dive on certain compounds is the certain cycles that he shows. So he shows a breakdown week by week of example cycles that he gleaned from talking to bodybuilders or well-known beginner approaches to these things. But at the very end of those lists, he's got like pro-level cycles for different stages in a program. They're laid out like this. So all of that is really interesting information. And that's why I particularly say that 2005 or the 2006 edition that I've got here are more interesting, because a lot of that information is omitted in later editions of this book. So it's gone through many editions, but the later ones don't have like all of those cycles. It just kind of got left out, maybe were considered too controversial. And also in later editions, he'd taken out some of the compound entries where he thought that they may not be available around anymore, when that may or may not be the case. And I'd rather have something more exhaustive, anything that you could possibly like hear about, all in one book. And the closest that he got to that was this edition, really, although it doesn't include later developments, things like Psalms, which are in some of the later editions. But apart from that, it's probably 2006 it's the most comprehensive. So really interesting to have there. And if I move on now to one or two examples of things that you may not have heard of, just to give you a flavour of how kind of exotic and exhaustive this book was for its time. He talks about Helios, the clenoyohimbine blend for spot reduction that many people would not have heard of. So that's in the entry there. And so if you, as well as the solid grounding in theoretical knowledge and safety and endocrinology and how all of these things are categorized and divided up, that you would get from reading this, you would also get specific little pieces of information that a lot of people that also compete or through bodybuilding circles would not have heard of. So an amazing book. And then after all of that information, it moves on to some lab reports, but they won't be so relevant to what you might come across and what you might want to be finding out about at this stage, when this was 2006. Same for all the pictures at the end. So the end sections have got loads of photographs, usually of farmer grade and veterinary grade products, but obviously it's 2024 at the time of making this video, and this was 2006, so that wouldn't be so relevant. And also I think that the likelihood of really being able to find and identify a legitimate pharmaceutical product from the picture versus in a book versus the product in your hand, it's not going to be too reliable. So I'd say that one of the few downsides of this book would be the usefulness of those pictures. They're more of a curiosity, really. So that would be one downside of it. Another downside of it really is that he tries to promote a nutritional supplement in amongst all of this. I think it was anachronic arachidonic, something like that acid. Anyway, I don't think that's really got a place in a book like this, but he's trying to promote a supplement. I'd say that's another downside of the book. And then the only other thing, and it's not really a downside, but it's just that it's not the latest information. But a lot of what would be considered later, these approaches to things often go in trends and cycles, excuse the pun. So, that wouldn't be such a downside, but it's certainly an amazing starting point and was completely exhaustive for its time. And I think in terms of the actual breakdown and categorizing things, you won't find anything clearer. So as a resource on PEDs and the enhancement side of bodybuilding, including all of those lesser known and more controversial aspects like insulin, diuretics, site enhancements even is covered in here. Yeah, brilliant book. I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10, and there will be more features on similar books in the future. If you found that interesting and want all of the information on bodybuilding, as I said, consider subscribing, and I'll be back in the gym tomorrow morning. Cheers.